Greetings everyone, welcome back to my sketchbook. I just wanted to sit down and doodle and maybe ramble a little bit about the new Marvel Fantastic Four movie and then see if I can just get something to fall out of my head. But I did say that I was kind of interested in maybe doing like a review, but not really. Actually, let's zoom in on this a little bit. See if this will be too much. All right, let's try that out. Anyway, and maybe talk a little bit about the movie without giving things away. I'm a big fan of comic books. Not the biggest fan of comic books, but I know enough about some of the storylines that they've been playing around with. The Infinity Gauntlet stuff. I mean, these are stories from 30 years ago when I was a kid and younger. And so they're not new stories. So they're doing some of these movies anyway. They're doing in such a way that they're changing them up a little bit and introducing characters that we may or may not have that much of an interest in. I don't know. But what I will say about the new movie is some of the earliest things that I would have seen was when they showed a female Silver Surfer. And there were some people that seemed rather upset about this. Now, I'll tell you a couple of things, and again, this is spoiler-free rambling. The Silver Surfer in the comic book world came from a place called Zenla. And on Zenla, the person that he loved most was, well, let's just say an immortal, but not really immortal. I don't know, but we'll say that an empress. And that person's name was Shalla-Bal. This is on Zenla. Now, here's some kind of wackiness that I'm just going to ramble on about. There are certain themes, I guess, that are very difficult, but you hear them a lot in different storylines. And I think they're necessary. It would be that of sacrifice. And, well, let's go back in time, I suppose. And we can even look at stories from a biblical sense. Let's say, maybe in regards to Abraham and Isaac. Now, if you're familiar with the story of Abraham and Isaac, you're kind of fitted with a sad sort of request. So, Abraham, wanting to have a child for such a long time, finally has a son of sorts. Now, I don't want to ruin anything if you haven't read that story. But Abraham was an old man, his wife also very old as well. This wasn't really the first child, but this is the first inherited child, I suppose. Anyway, it is grand sadness, but he's given instructions that he is to go to a mountain and sacrifice his child. And because he listens to the voice of the Creator and obeys, he instructs his son to come along on this journey only to tell the son, really, that they're going to, set up a sacrifice, and the son doesn't question this. So anyway, there's that story. And another story that you might kind of run into might be a parable. And that parable tells a story of a shepherd who is missing one of his sheep. So what does the shepherd do? The shepherd goes, leaving the rest of the sheep, to find the one that is missing. That's a strange thing, you might think. But it's a beautiful story. And of course, then there's John 3:16, which has to do with loving the world so much that you were willing to give up your only son, much the way that Abraham was asked to do so in that old story. So, what does that have to do with the Fantastic Four? Again, spoiler free. Again, it's about sacrifice. And one of the most horrible sort of things that you might run into with sacrifice would be choices that you would have to make. Would you be willing to give up something that you love? Would you be willing to sacrifice the whole world for something that you love? I guess those are different questions, right? Now, to the choice of a female surfer. Something that's remarkable would be the stories that you might have heard. They are remarkable stories where you hear of a mother's love and what is capable for a mother to do for their child. So one such thing, I think a lot of us have heard the stories of a mother in some sort of distress finds a way to lift, let's say, a bus or just a car off their child who is underneath it. Which is kind of a remarkable thing. It's almost an inhuman kind of super strength kind of remarkable thing. Let's back this out a little bit because I think we got enough of what I got going on here. I think it ends up being a remarkable sort of story. I don't know how this drawing is going to turn out, if I'm being honest. If you have the means by which to protect the one you love, what would you do to, protect them? Like, what sort of sacrifices would you make to protect the ones you love? So, I threw those little things in your head just so that you could kind of see those age-old dilemmas that somebody might face. Choices. I don't know what I think of what I got going on here. So what did I think of the movie? I can tell you, as somebody who's actually read a lot of comics and who has a familiarity with a lot of those comics, I actually really enjoyed this movie because I'm familiar with some of the variants and variant stories. And I'm not able to predict all outcomes because, well, they don't really give us all the outcomes. For whatever reason, they're not perfectly following the stories that I would have read when I was a kid. As far as how we have a female version of the surfer, well, I do think that this version really does relate to the surfer that I would know. From the same planet, possibly just a different choice made. Now, I think I mentioned this in one of the other videos about Loki and a little bit of the TVA, that there are different timelines. And I think there were people that, as soon as they made the announcement and showed the new surfer, they criticized Disney for making choices on identity politics or whatever kind of catchphrase stuff that you hear people go on about. I promise you, this movie is not set up like that. Much of the movie actually follows an aesthetic, I guess you could say, um, of the 1960s. And that's a remarkable thing because that's a time period where a lot of these comics would have come into being. Now, let me see here. And a lot of those comic book creators went out of their way to try to figure out the times that they were in and reflect them in some ways to the readers of their comics. So you might say, well, can you imagine Spider-Man being available to read during a time when Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement were around? How interesting is that? But then, they would try to find ways to reflect this back for their readership. And if you have any sort of familiarity with the X-Men, same kind of thing. They've been kind of dealing with stuff for quite some time. Again, to send it back to their readership. I'm going to dip my pen here. So I'm just kind of scratching as I go here. And then I'll put in sort of like more detail further along. And of course, this is freehand, so I'm not really truly going to get a lot of like symmetry, or I'm dealing with keeping some mistakes and losing some, but it won't be a finished thing. This is just a doodle in my sketchbook. So again, getting back to the movie, what did I think of it? I actually really enjoyed the movie. I think I would recommend it. Disney has been kind of an odd duck to me. I think in some ways, they might have ruined some of their audience by trying to make some of their movies keep up with the times. I think that's a wonderful thing if you can do it. And it's difficult in a way too, because you might throw away your core audience by doing that. And it's a business. And if you're not supported by the people that you're making it for, I wonder what is your purpose in making it in the first place. Now, we should be so lucky to have opinions about what we would want characters to be like, and have them reflect back on us. You know, someone would love to see a version of themselves as a hero. And why not? You know, to be represented in some way is an awesome thing. But of course, you know, you don't play around with certain creatures and certain characters. I'm trying to figure out something here by memory's sake. The surfer has incredible power given by, I should say, Galactus. And then Galactus is a being of immense power, and for the most part isn't really a spiteful being at all. Something you'll see in the movie, and hope this doesn't ruin anything for anybody, and I don't know if they would have done this on purpose. You get to see the characters get together for a Sunday meal. And it's very important to them to do that. Now, I don't think they did this on purpose, but it's worth noting that every living creature requires living organisms in order to survive. So you have to consume something that was living in order to survive. Now, if they did that on purpose, congratulations to them. But yeah, so if you're a vegetarian, you eat plants, and you might be under the impression that the plants that you eat are living things, but may not have feelings. And of course, every so often you might hear of studies where somebody will play music or talk nicely to the plant, and the plant will actually yield better flowers or yield better growth in general for having listened to, let's say, classical music, or to be spoken to there's a benefit given to the plant. I know I'm just rambling on here. I don't really talk when I draw. Again, I say that, but it's true. And just the way I said that, that didn't make sense either. I don't talk when I draw, typically. But the sketchbook thing here has been kind of a fun thing for me. So yeah. I don't know what else I can kind of ramble on about. But the surfer, going back to the surfer as a herald of Galactus would go, or any herald, because Galactus has had many heralds, would go out of their way to try to find planets for the devourer of worlds to consume that were uninhabited. At least they felt that they were. And in some cases they weren't uninhabited, making the surfer in a lot of ways responsible for the end of life for billions. And that's a sad thing to carry with you. To know that you're a party to something like that. Again, Galactus is not spiteful. And a little bit earlier, you heard me talking about, in the movie, not done obviously, you get to see people get together to eat. And you heard me say that all living things require living things to eat, to consume, in order for them to live. And Galactus is like that. That's a strange image that I think I've come up with. I wanted to have some female attributes, Shalla-Bal, and to make note of what sacrifice could be. And again, I will say I will recommend the movie, and if at all possible, do your best to keep some of those things in mind that I mentioned in regards to sacrifice when you watch it. What are you willing to give up? And what are you willing to sacrifice in order to keep something? It's interesting concepts. Well, I think that's going to be it, folks. It's kind of what I could kind of come up with. Let me see if I can back that out just a little bit further. maybe to there. So I'm going to lock it down just a little bit. And I will mark a name. I forget if it's two L's. For some reason in my head, I think it is. There you go. That is it for now. Thanks for hanging out. Hopefully that wasn't too much rambling, and I honestly don't think I gave away any real deal secrets and spoilers for the movie. I really do think that the movie is pretty good, and I don't know, we'll see what the next sort of phase of the MCU will bring us, because, well, these are familiar stories, at least to some of us, and I think we're expecting a lot in our escapism. So, all right then, folks. A quick zoom in, if it'll zoom. Come on now. And kind of a quick zoom out. All right. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you again at some point in the near future, I trust, and I hope you have a great day. Ciao for now.